Man, 6 years. 6 years since my last book review. That is just absolutely wild. Hello everyone, my name is Blue1442, and it's time for another inconsistent media review. This time we're going to be looking at The Wolf of Withervale by Joaquín Baldwin, a epic fantasy tale. Now before we really get into it, I actually want to mention that I actually got a advanced reader copy of the book, meaning that I got the book 2 months earlier for free in exchange for a honest review, which honestly is really cool. According to Goodreads, Joaquín has actually worked on other books in the past, sometimes being the illustrator for the cover, and sometimes even writing a fully fledged book himself. So then, Wolf of Withervale is actually his biggest personal project yet. Being a writer is actually something Joaquín only does on the side, as he does primary work on a little indie studio that you may have heard of, called Disney. He's worked as a layout artist on such movies like Encanto, Frozen, and Zootopia, so it's very interesting to see that he actually wrote a full-length fantasy novel. Did I say a full-length novel? I mean 6 of them. According to his website, all 6 books of the Nas saga are already written and are just currently being edited. So I have to commend him for essentially just writing the entire story before even releasing the first book. The Wolf of Withervale is a LGBT story all about self-discovery, mystery, and adventure, all set in this grand fantasy world. Our protagonist Lagos finds this wolf mask that essentially thrusts him into a long adventure. Now there isn't any like Tolkien-esque races or world building like, elves and dwarves yet, so it was so refreshing reading this book. You have no idea how boring it is to read a fantasy book that just follows like the same rules over and over again. In fact, the world building of Nas is quite thorough. It's very clear Joaquín put a lot of thought and effort into the world building. Like how the money QP is essentially these like 3D Tetramino shapes that each have like different values depending on what material they're made of, and making them into like a 3x3 like grid, kind of like a Rubik's Cube, would mean like 100 of the value. Or how he made like a geological and political map of the world of Nas that has these like mysterious domes of vines protruding all over them. Or even how the miners up north essentially have no way to properly detect a gas leak, so they have to like import these birds from down south that whenever they're in pain, they essentially sing until they die, which is so like, it's incredible problem solving, but also incredibly fucked up. All the pictures you're seeing are actually on Joaquín's supplement site for The Wolf of Withervale. It has, a glossary, images, and, other sorts of illustrations. However, I did feel like it was almost necessary to have the page open while reading the book in order to fully understand certain concepts or words. It wasn't enough to really have it be a big issue, but it was enough to really notice. I guess a good way to describe what I'm talking about is the active time lore system from Final Fantasy 16, where at any point in time you can pause a cutscene and you will see blurbs of important information. That's kind of how reading the book felt. There was a important piece of information that I definitely needed the site for, and that was where in the world Withervale was, which is right over here. Now in terms of the book's story, I'm going to go over acts 1, 2, and 3. I'm only going to talk about story specifics in act 1 and try to avoid too much in act 2 or 3 for spoiler reasons. Now then, act 1. The story starts with us meeting the 2 main characters, Lago, who has identity issues but is very interested in the cosmos and the stars, and Aria, a Ordrin miner who acts like a big sister to Lago. The first 2 chapters really set up Lago and how he really doesn't fit in anywhere in Withervale. He's not really the manliest person, he likes putting nail polish on, and he's gay, which really doesn't help when he's also living in a very abusive household. And Aria has her own issues where she has to deal with this almost passive-aggressive racism from the citizens of Withervale. And immediately in chapter 3, a fox shapeshifter finds Lago and gives him a wolf mask, essentially saying, "Find Bombay," before succumbing to these wounds from the Nagian army. Like, I don't even know what Lago's favorite color is yet, and the plot is already trying to push him forward. Now, the main thing about Act 1 is that it sort of revolves around this mask that Lago suddenly has, and how he just doesn't know what to do with it. He can't really put it on because it causes him, like, immense pain. He can't hide it at home because his dad is a bitch, so he decided to, like, hide it in the mines where Aria works. And the other part of Act 1 is that, you know, since it's the beginning of an entire series, there's a lot of exposition. You see, Lago essentially knows a professor named Krista, who essentially explains to him all the ins and outs of the worlds of Nas, and, you know, by extension, you the reader. And look, I get it. It's a new fantasy world, and you want to make sure your readers understand certain systems of that world. But there were so many times where characters would just keep on explaining something, and it got to the point where mentally I was just like, yeah, I get it. You see, the one I remember the most was when Krista was explaining Lago the moon, and then she was all like, each phase of the moon corresponds to the 6 days of the week, and you know which phase of the moon it is by the color it emits, and each color changes depending on the season that you're in and it's emitted by. Like, there wasn't even enough time to also really process all this information. Like, yeah, I guess it worked if I could still remember all of the things about the moon, but all of these things happen within like 4 to 7 pages. So another thing I noticed, and this seems more like a stylistic choice than anything, you know how when a topic is being transitioned into something else and there's like a paragraph to sort of talk about it before like a character talks about it? Well, this one seems like they're like reversed, where a character would say something and then there was a paragraph sort of explaining something. Like, it almost felt like characters were almost interjecting a lot more than usual. See, this happened a lot in Act 1, but I don't remember it happening too much in Act 2, so I guess that either means it stopped happening or I just got used to it. And I guess speaking of that, Act 2. Now again, I'm going to hold back on specific story elements for Act 2 just to avoid some spoilers. Lago is now 19. He is working under Krista, and the mask is now just a lingering thought in his mind. The first half of Act 2 is all about Lago's new adult life. You know, he has a job, he has income, he has a home, his abusive father is no longer in Withervale. He's found intimacy. He's just happy now. Aria is still working in the mines. She's not really happy with it, but it's a consistent life. And during this half, he sort of just forgets that the mask even exists. We really didn't learn any new information about the mask besides that it hurt to put on and whoever this bomb figure is. And it was kind of annoying because the mask was introduced into the story so early on. However, we do get to learn more about the antagonists of the story, some soldiers from the Nagian Empire, and how they relate to the mask itself, as well as Nas as a whole. I really did enjoy essentially the main bad guy of the story. Like, he had so much charm, like intimidation, and I just loved every time that I was reading anything happening about him. The second half of Act 2 is now where Lago and Aria are now thrust into this adventure regarding the mask, and now they have to leave Withervale and travel around the world of Nas. And travel they do. There is so much movement in this part of the book. Like, they go from A to B, and then B to C, and then C to D, and then D to E. It was very hard for me to like really get invested into the world when they only like stayed in like one location for like a page before moving on, with like 2 main exceptions. In fact, there is so much movement that one of the images you can find on Joaquín's companion site is literally a map of their journey. See, it showed like how big the world of Nas was with the journey they did, but also showed like, you know, how nomadic this book seemed. Now, I guess sort of relating to distance, but the passage of time was also something I was struggling with. I can handle the 6-year time jump between Acts 1 and 2, like that's totally fine. But in the second half of Act 2, there was like so many instances where between like 2 paragraphs, like a couple weeks could have passed. Like, the amount of times I read the phrase and then like X weeks or X days passed just got on my nerves so much. Like, I can handle it happening like once or twice, but when it happens so frequently that I can make a drinking game out of it, then I think that there's a problem. Something Joaquín is really good at writing, however, are these like very intense action scenes. Like there was one that I won't spoil, but I was just on the edge of my seat for the entire time that was happening. Like it was so good. Like the stakes were high, everything was very well planned out. There was no like leaps of logic or weird moments where characters would do something that they wouldn't. It was a very enjoyable ride. Now then, Act 3. In Act 3, the party finally like stays in one location, which gives us, both time to, finally like not be in a rush anymore and finally like digest all of the new information we learned at the end of Act 2. And in addition, all the upcoming new mysteries that are happening in Act 3. This is gonna sound weird, but Act 3 was both my favorite and the least favorite part of the book. Now let me explain. See, one of my favorite parts was finally uncovering the mystery surrounding the mask and how, the history of the mask is just very much tied in with the history of Nos itself. These concepts and ideas were a lot better like explained in Act 3 compared to Act 1. There would still be, some exposition that would happen in this part of the book, but now there would be other characters that would like ask a question that you would never really think of, but then if you thought about it a bit more would make perfect sense to ask, and there would be like a really satisfying answer to that question too. It never really felt like I was being overloaded with information either, because this entire thing happened throughout Act 3 rather than being like one chapter and then another chapter. Act 3 also contained like my favorite moments of the antagonists. Like he just had insane moments like that just opened my eyes, as well as like weirdly funny moments too. Like it's so weird seeing someone do these like heinous acts but then also still be relatable. I just wish he had a lot more screen time in the book. Now I'm gonna go over my second biggest issue of Act 3 before getting into the biggest one. So the second biggest one is towards the end of the book, it started feeling like Joaquín was trying to rush to get to the ending. Like it had the most egregious examples of, and then X days or times passed. I swear there was like a couple chapters where there was like 3 weeks that passed between 2 paragraphs. It was like, why? Like, I don't think it would have been as bad either, but like time would pass and then the character would do like these like very like mundane things that didn't even seem like it was important enough to write. And then it would be like another thing of like, oh, then 7 more days passed. Like it made moments that should have had a lot more impact feel a lot more dull when the next like sentence is just, oh, next week is here now. And my biggest issue is the book just ends. You see, throughout Act 3, which is like one half of the book, by the way, they were like building up towards this like really big event. And I was excited, like both parties were talking about this event happening. And I was so ready. Like if the other action scene was so good, like how would this one be? But it doesn't happen. It just doesn't. It's like, imagine you're watching a movie and there's 2 characters that are just like, oh dude, look, is that boat sinking? Shit, we need to go help out. And it like ends before even getting close to the boat. I get that this is the beginning of a series and that every single plot point needs to be answered, but come on. You don't write about this event happening for such a long time and then just don't put it in the book. In fact, like because of this happening, like I don't think I can pinpoint somewhere in the story where I can consider it being the climax. Like the whole book felt like you're on a roller coaster and that's going up, but only at like a 10-degree incline for 600 pages. Like I'm still waiting for the drop to happen. See, I think what irks me even more is that in the digital copy of the book I have, and I think the physical copies from what Joaquín has said, is a sample, or like the first 2 chapters of book 2 of the Nas saga. And in these first 2 chapters are when the event happens. And I loved it. See, I firmly believe that these first couple of chapters should have been in book 1, and then you would end on a cliffhanger there and have a much more impactful ending. Because then I would be like dying to know what would happen in book 2. Now that's essentially the end of the book. Now, what are my closing thoughts? I think Wolf of Withervale is a very okay book. While I did enjoy it for the most part, there were like a lot of things I wish were done better, like over-explaining certain concepts, as well as the general pacing of Act 2 and 3. It definitely has some really nice LGBTQ plus representation. There was some very sweet moments, there was funny moments. I think it was all done very well and tastefully. And I still can't sing praises on just how good the world building is of Nas. If I were to give like a rating to the book, maybe like 3 stars out of 5, 3.5. I would still recommend the book if you're looking for some new fantasy book to get into or looking for more LGBT media. I'm still excited for book 2, don't get me wrong. If book 1 was all, like exposition and setup, that means book 2 will not have to spend so much time with that and get into like the really insane world building or action scenes. Okay, if you're listening, I know you said on your site that, all of the books are already written. So maybe for like book 2, for like supplements, could you add like a timeline or something to it? Either like a basic one where it's just like, here's the year and months, it's like, and then it goes to the end, or maybe even like points on the like movement map you made, just something to make it the passage time be a lot more digestible. That's all I have to say about Wolf of Withervale. Now, if you're interested in the book, I will put a link to the Amazon page in the description below. And let me know what you think of the book too in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I have no idea what my next review is going to be. At this point, it could be just poetry at this point or something. But remember, don't die, it's bad for your health. And take care. See ya.